You've been watching the news, you're hearing all kinds of stuff about what is or isn't going on in the real estate market. We've got all of the fresh numbers from right here in Central Maine. Stick around, we have your December market update coming today. Hello Central Maine, it is your realtor Nick Isgro with eXp Realty. And as I just stated, today we're gonna break down all of the numbers. We got them hot off the press so we can give you some live insight into what's really happening in the Central Maine real estate market. We're gonna put some rumors aside, take a look at what the actual trends are, and then make some predictions about where we might be going as we head into the later winter months. Now, before I get into that, I do wanna welcome you here to the channel. If you've never been here before, we cover all things real estate here in the state of Maine, but particularly right here in the Central Maine market. If that's of interest to you or adds value in your process in the buying and selling of homes, or maybe you just like real estate, do me a favor, go ahead and hit the like button on this video, hit subscribe, knock that little alarm bell, you'll be notified every time we put out new content. Of course, before we get started, one of the things I always like to point out is that I put the graphs up on the screen because what I like to look at is trends. It's important that we don't just look month to month, but we look at trend lines. We also look at seasonality, because real estate does occur seasonally depending on what market that you're operating in. But there are also some changes, but we'll find it out as we look at the overall picture of what's going on. Now I wanna jump right in here to new listings. Let's bring it right up. New listings, 111 new listings posted in the month of November as we head into the month of December. Now, where were we a year ago? A year ago, if you look at this graph, not very far off. We had at about 120 new listings last November. Last December, it actually dipped down to 83, so which means that we should expect this number to go down again for December, and then again maybe in January if we're gonna follow the seasonal trends that we've seen in the past. So not anything earth-shattering here, but it does show that even though we've seen some of these bigger inventory numbers, and we'll get into that in a little bit, because of longer market times, it's not being driven by a flood of new houses on the market. And as we see this retracting and falling into what we would expect in this seasonal retraction, we don't really see where bigger numbers are gonna come from. So this looks like we're actually kind of normalizing out where we've been in the last year. No major earthquakes here. Now let's talk about sales activity. And I'm gonna break sales activity into two numbers because they're important to look at separately. One of them is closed sales. That's how many homes actually closed, signed the contract during the month and changed hands. The other will be pended listings. That's homes that went into escrow during the last month and remain that way, so they're still not final sales as we head into the month of December. So let's bring up the graph. Sold listings, 133 sold listings. This is a big difference from last year, and this, if you remember last month, we talked about the fact that pended listings, that's homes under contract, were down. That would probably translate into fewer sales and as we headed into December. Well, here we are in December, and that has translated into fewer sales. If we look at this graph, you can see very clearly about 187 closed sales during the same time period a year ago. So this is showing us less sales activity going on in the market as compared to a year ago. So while we're putting less new listings on, there's actually less buyer activity going on as well. Now there is some seasonal trend. You can look at the graph and see how it spikes up into the spring and summer months. But compared to a year ago, it has backed off a little bit. Now let's jump right into pended listings because this is going to be the important number when we put these together as we then get into inventory, but then talk about inventory and see how that affects what's going on with pricing. So pended listings, 63 homes under contract. You can see second month in a row, big change from the year before. And this is going to drive, again, just like last month, this is going to drive as we get into January, fewer homes changing hands in the month of January. This is where the increase of inventory is coming from. Now, why is it important when we look at sales activity versus new listings coming to market? Well, if the new listings coming to market, let's say we had a flood of new listings and inventory was exploding that way, what would that do? That would obviously put a lot of downward pressure on pricing because there'd be more and more competition. This is a little bit more organic. We're actually getting fewer listings coming to market. They're just taking a little bit longer to sell. In that case, there's not a ton of downward pressure on pricing, although there is some, which we will cover in a little bit. But important to note that the increase of inventory that we're talking about on the market, when we talk about a market shift, the shift in the market that we're talking about is this, and it's buyer activity. It's the fact that there are fewer buyers in the market making transactions on a day-to-day basis. I can tell you my experience out in the market right now with buyers is, they're looking, they're taking their time. They're making sure that when they actually pull the trigger on a home, that it's the home they want. They might go back 2 or 3 times, whereas last spring, that was just unheard of. If you looked at a house, you liked it, you better put an offer in that day, probably $20,000 to $30,000 over asking price. That's done. What's happening now is a little bit more normalcy where buyers are going in, they are negotiating. If the home is priced accurately, there probably won't be a ton of downside negotiation, but there will be some negotiation from the sellers as we want to get these homes moved with a longer shelf time comparatively to the spring. So with all this talk about inventory, what's happening with inventory? Because you're hearing the inventory is going up. Well, that's true, but it's not true. It's true in general that we have had more inventory than we've seen over some of the last year, but as that shift took place over the summer, take a look at this. 312 overall active listings as we're heading into December. We did actually have more listings over the summer, July, August, September, even October. There were more active listings sitting on the market. Now, if that trend had continued, that's where we would start to see a lot of that downward pressure on price. But it's not, because there's fewer homes that are actually coming to market. Even though buyers have regained some negotiation at the table in the market, we're still a long ways off from what we would consider a buyer's market, or something that slanted more in favor towards buyers than to sellers. This is what's keeping those price points high. Very quickly, we're going to take a look at average days on market. This is the average amount of days that a house will stay on the market before going into escrow. Bringing it up here, 24 days. Nothing really earth-shaking about this. There are certain subcategories of homes, like I could tell you certain neighborhoods in Waterville, certain price points in China or Waterville, Winslow, wherever. We could find niche places and neighborhoods that might be 30, 40, 50 days. That's why if you're selling the home, you really want to work with your real estate professional that you're working with to figure out what it is for you, where your home is. Look at what's going on in that very niched out local market to your home, because that's going to give you the best expectation when you're selling your home. But by and large, definitely we're out more than we were over the spring and summer. But if we look over the last year, this is about where we've been. There's not major changes happening with market time. Of course, the last thing we always want to get into here, what everyone is wondering is, what is this doing to price? So we'll talk about the sale to list price ratio. Bringing up the sale to list price ratio, this is, again, the percentage of the list price that these homes actually get sold for. So if your home is $100,000, you get offered $100,000, that's 100% sale to list price ratio. Bringing it up here, we're at about 98%. So now what's really interesting here is that we're actually at only about 95% of the sale to the original list price ratio, which tells me that there's price reductions happening in the market. Last summer, these numbers would have been the same: sale to original list price, sale to list price ratio. Now what we're seeing is 98% sale to list price ratio. But if I go back to the original price that that home was listed for, it's at about 95%. So you can see that's where the price reductions are occurring. So as you're pricing your home, I can't stress this enough, just incredibly important to work with your real estate professional, look at what's going on in the market, and really try to price that home appropriately, then understand what your average market times are and get a good expectation of where you should be. The last number we want to look at is just the average sold price. This doesn't necessarily always tell us where pricing is going in any particular market, but it does tell us where the majority of sales volume is coming from. So average sales price in Kennebec County for the month of November, about $268,000. Really tells us around where the majority of that sales activity is happening. So there it is, folks. That is the full, complete market update as we head into the month of December. Nothing earth-shattering, nothing we haven't been really expecting over the last couple of months. We've been watching those pending contracts go down and down. We've been guessing that would obviously translate into fewer and fewer sales. That did happen. But what's also happened is we're now getting into that seasonal slump. We're adding fewer listings. No real major change from a year ago, just getting into that seasonal area where people are pulling back and not putting their homes in the market, maybe waiting to ride out the holidays. Either way, it has led to a bit of an increase in inventory, although as we saw, not as much inventory as we had in July, August, and September. So really for the remaining part of this year, as we head into 2023, I don't see a lot of movement either way, either for buyers, for sellers. I think we're gonna see strong pricing, but definitely room to negotiate for the buyers that are on the market. Now, if you are in the market, if you're looking to buy or sell a home, if you've been in the market and you just recently completed a transaction, go ahead and drop a comment below. Would love to hear what your experience has been. If you have a prediction about where all of this is leading us here in Central Maine, please drop that below too. Always love to hear what your predictions are. And of course, if you're looking for a real estate professional to work with, all of my contact information is linked in the post below. Would love to hear from you. I promise I'll get right back to you. If it's not something I can personally help you with, if you're not in my particular market, I would be happy to refer you to a professional in my network that I have throughout the entire country. As always, I thank each and every one of you for sticking around to the end of this video, and until the next one, I'll see you next time.